Paraquat is a popular herbicide used to kill weeds and grasses. It's most commonly sprayed on corn, soybeans, cotton, and grapes. And it's used here in parts of the North Country. It's also been linked since the 1990s to Parkinson's disease. Amjalat Ajasa is a reporter with New York Focus.
One study that we pointed to found that mice injected with paraquat lost dopamine neurons, which is kind of a hallmark of Parkinson's disease. And the study, according to one of the experts who I spoke with, who was one of the first to make the links between paraquat and Parkinson's disease, said that she believed that it's one of the strongest databases out there linking a chemical to its impact on human health.
An effort is underway in Albany to ban the herbicide. That's today's story of the day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from the Clarkson School, offering advanced high school-age students the opportunity to start college early at Clarkson University. Clarkson.edu/TCS.
Hey, I'm David Summerstein. It's Friday, August 7th. First up, a new building in Albany will honor former Governor George Pataki. The New York Public News Network's Jimmy Vielkind reports.
The two-story building is a converted house on a back street near the state capitol. And Pataki, a Republican who served from 1995 to 2006, says he hopes it'll be a forum for bipartisan government.
Because it's not about a Republican beating a Democrat or a Democrat beating a Republican. It's about you being able to make people's lives better.
Pataki helped oversee the response to the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. He also created the state's first charter schools and legalized capital punishment, though a court eventually struck down the death penalty. His foundation is raising aid for Ukraine and supports students studying government. The 81-year-old's last run for office was a brief 2016 presidential campaign. In Albany, I'm Jimmy Vielkind for the New York Public News Network.
A new report commissioned by the state legislature takes a close look at New York's court-ordered mental health treatment program, more than a quarter century after Kendra's law first took effect. As Samuel King with the New York Public News Network reports, some advocates say the findings show cause for concern.
Kendra's law allows a court to order assisted outpatient treatment, or AOT, for people who have been determined to be at risk of harming themselves or others. Researchers at the University of Pittsburgh and the Human Services Research Institute found those who went through voluntary treatment mostly had similar outcomes to those who went through court-mandated treatment. Luke Sakinyi is with the Alliance for Rights in Recovery. He says the report highlights concerns about due process and access to services.
So for us, that really says that, it's up to the state to really advance and expand the services so more people have access to them without having a court order.
Speaking on public radio's The Capitol Press Room, Dr. Miriam Tepper with the State Office of Mental Health says officials are reviewing the report's recommendations.
We really feel it is for this very small group of people for whom it is appropriate. It is a really important tool in the toolbox, and we want to be sure that it continues to be available for those who need it.
Kendra's law expires next year unless the legislature renews it. In Albany, I'm Samuel King for the New York Public News Network.
More than 70 countries have outlawed the use of the herbicide paraquat, with some bans dating back to the 1980s. But here in the United States, federal data shows that its use across the country doubled to at least 11 million pounds per year. 14 states, including New York, have introduced bills to restrict or ban the herbicide. Amjalat Ajasa of New York Focus, an online news site based in Albany, has been reporting on this, and her work brought her to the Washington County town of Hebron, outside of Glens Falls. She spoke with Champlain Valley reporter Kara Chapman.
I decided to go to Hebron because there's a resident named Sarah Teal who spoke out as an advocate for a New York bill which looked to potentially ban the use of paraquat in the state. As she spoke, she talked about her community, which kind of became, in some ways, a hot spot for Parkinson's disease. And like I said, studies dating back to the late 1990s had linked paraquat to Parkinson's disease. And her husband was actually diagnosed with Parkinson's disease after dealing with symptoms that they couldn't explain for a decade. And, she knocked on doors in her community and found that there were other residents near her home that had Parkinson's disease. And, she spoke to a tenant farmer who used her land and found that this person had used paraquat on their land for years. And it started to make her wonder whether or not she was seeing the real life ramifications of this use.
Something that really struck me about your story is, some of the heartbreaking stories of the people there and, what they've lost due to Parkinson's disease. Can you talk a bit about what they told you?
Yeah, I spoke with several residents who were diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in the community, and they spoke about how the diagnosis really changed their lives. One of my characters, Sally, talked about how she was diagnosed literally the day that she got engaged, thinking that she was starting this new life. And later in that evening, she found out that she had Parkinson's disease and, had to subsequently retire. It's something that they say has shaped and impacted every facet of their lives. Sally talked about how she used to be a singer and how, she's basically not really able to sing anymore. When you hear her speak, her voice is really just above a whisper. And Gordon, similar impacts. He talked about how he used to run up to the top of this really gorgeous farm and how that's not something he can physically do anymore. Like I said in the story, he has mobility challenges. There's kind of this sense of, for them, feeling like maybe their condition could be attributed to something outside of their control.
Right, the paraquat exposure, potentially. In the story, you talk about how one of the world's largest producers of paraquat is Syngenta, this Swiss agricultural technology company. What have they said publicly about this research linking paraquat and Parkinson's disease, and how is that stacked up with what they've said privately?
Yeah, Syngenta is the largest manufacturer and producer of paraquat, although they have decided to stop selling paraquat in the United States. And basically, they have kind of stood by the product safety. They have pointed to research of their own that suggests that paraquat does not cause the same neuron damage associated with Parkinson's disease that other studies have found. And they've been very outspoken and adamant that, when used the way that the EPA has outlined, paraquat is safe for use. But it's been reported by The Guardian and the New Lead that privately, the company was aware of the growing narrative that Parkinson's could be linked to paraquat exposure and really actively worked to cut through that noise through a number of strategic measures to push their own narrative that there wasn't a causal relationship between paraquat use and Parkinson's disease.
Paraquat has been banned in dozens of countries, and in the U.S., states introduced bills to ban it this year, but only Vermont passed theirs. What happened to the bill that you mentioned earlier in New York to ban paraquat use?
A number of bills this year did not get to see the light of day due to the delayed budget negotiations and the delayed release of the budget. And the paraquat bill was one of them. Despite making it to the floor in its first year, it did not have enough time to be voted on. And the assembly member who brought that bill to the floor this year is committed to, she said, to making sure that it gets to the floor again and voted on next year. The fact that it got to the floor this year in its first year being introduced seems that means that there's some support behind it.
And is there any opposition to the bill?
The bill has faced a lot of opposition from agricultural groups who say that when used the way that the EPA has restricted its use, that it's safe for farmers. And, they don't want to not be able to use this crop protection tool.
Amdalat, why was it important for you to report this story out and to go to Hebron and talk to those people and, hear from Syngenta? Why was it important to do this story?
I think it was important to do this story because while not everybody lives in rural or farming towns where herbicides or pesticides are used, it doesn't mean that those voices aren't important. And that doesn't mean that those stories of impact shouldn't be told. Paraquat is something that I had reported on in the past. And when I saw that New York was introducing a bill to potentially ban its use, I wanted to know more about those who are impacted here in the state. And it turns out that there are a number of people who believe they're impacted by paraquat use and what that could continue to mean for not only them, but future generations of people who could be continuously be exposed to the herbicide.
That was Amjalad Ajasa, a climate reporter with New York Focus. She spoke with Kara Chapman. We have more news all the time and through the weekend on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Mark Corey of Watertown and Oscar Sarmiento of Potsdam. Have a super weekend. I'm David Sommerstein, North Country Public Radio.